Welcome back to the Hotastic Podcast. This season, I'm talking with people and experts who have been diagnosed with cancer or who work with cancer patients on a variety of topics that you said via survey was important to you. These will be 20 to 60-minute conversations with people who are the real experts of the lived experience. I'm calling it the Spring Survivorship Series. Today's show topic will be focused on immunotherapy. According to a world-renowned healthcare facilities website, that I'm not going to name, immunotherapy is a type of cancer treatment. It uses substances made by the body or in a laboratory to boost the immune system and help the body find and destroy cancer cells. Immunotherapy can treat many different types of cancer, and it can be used alone or in combination with chemotherapy or other cancer treatments. My guest today is Ms. Lisa Haynes. Lisa is the administrator of the Facebook Community Lung Cancer Support Network. Lisa, welcome to the show, and please share a little bit about who you are and how you're impacted by lung cancer.
Hi, Katie, and thank you for having me. My name is Lisa Haynes, as you said, and I am a stage 4 lung cancer survivor, currently at 8 years, and I owe much of that to the fact that I was treated with immunotherapy. I'm also a mom, a grandmama of 3, and I love to travel and see my son who lives in San Diego.
Fantastic. So when were you diagnosed, Lisa?
I was diagnosed in March of 2015.
And can I ask you what that experience was like? Had you heard about lung cancer before or immunotherapy before?
I had not heard of, well, I had heard of lung cancer, but not of immunotherapy. And I never had any classic lung cancer symptoms, so it came as quite a shock. I was diagnosed because of sudden neurological changes, which ended up being a brain met, which we later learned was a metastasize from stage 4 lung cancer.
Wow. And so initially, what were you told about your lung cancer and the types of treatments that were available for you?
Initially, I spent a week in the hospital, actually in a neurology unit, because we had to go through further testing to realize that it was a met from lung cancer. So the initial goal initially was to treat the brain tumor and figure out how to do that, whether I could have it surgically removed, which didn't end up being an option. So I learned about stereotactic radiation, which was the plan. During that time, more testing also revealed that I had a lung tumor, but that was going to be the secondary treatment because the brain tumor was causing neurological functions. I lost the feeling in my right arm and hand, so that had to be addressed first. It was all quite overwhelming, as you can imagine.
Absolutely. It sounds frightening, actually. Were you offered any kind of palliative therapy or physical therapy when you were having these types of symptoms when you were diagnosed?
When I actually came home from the hospital, I did have physical therapy and occupational therapy to help me get the strength back in my arm and hands. And they did put me on high doses of dexamethasone, which is a steroid, which did bring the edema down in my brain. So I did regain those functions. So we started with that, and then they planned the radiation, which I had about 5 weeks later.
Okay. And so when did the immunotherapy come into play?
Following the radiation, I actually started on chemotherapy. At the time, immunotherapy was only available in clinical trials, so the standard of care was to start with chemotherapy, and then they thought if that wasn't successful, that they would send me to Dana-Farber, where I went for my second opinions, to consider a clinical trial there with immunotherapy. The chemotherapy for me was actually quite successful, and I reached NED my first summer. Later that year, I had progression and needed to change treatment. And by that time, immunotherapy had been FDA approved as a first and second line treatment, but second line in my case.
Wow, timing. That couldn't have been any better timing. Was there any hesitation when they brought up immunotherapy for you?
I initially was really scared about it because I didn't understand what it was. And because I had had progression so early on with a stage 4 diagnosis, I was feeling so crappy from chemo and what I had been through, I didn't have a lot of faith that something else was going to help, because back then we were all told basically that if you survive a year, that's a miracle. So I was hesitant, but my oncologist had really been studying immunotherapy and had done a lot of research on it. So she sat me down and went into a great detail about how it works and how it's different from chemotherapy. And, why would I not want to try that when I tried chemo, which in some cases can have even more side effects. And she said, I think it's just because you're familiar with chemo and you know what it is and you've heard of it for years, where this is new. So once she kind of explained it and, drew me all these little diagrams and explained how it works, and then I thought, okay, well, I will try it. So I did, a bit reluctantly at first because it was so new, and it was just, we were the first patients out of clinical trials to try it. So, but thank God I did.
Absolutely. And so side effects, did you have any?
Initially, I did not have any side effects. There actually are a lot of side effects, and we've learned even more now in the last 6 years since I had it. But I did over time develop low-grade pneumonitis, which is one of the known side effects, and had to take a couple treatment breaks for that. And a lot of fatigue and joint and muscle pain, again, typical symptoms, but it was working well. So the fact is, it was working and I was seeing shrinkage on my scans. So we kept going, but doing the treatment breaks to try to allow my lungs to clear on their own. And we did that throughout for 9 months. I was on immunotherapy, but the third time I got pneumonitis, it was even worse, and I ended up in the emergency room. So that's when they decided that I would need to stop it, and we would decide what to do once that cleared again. Luckily, I've been stable ever since. So it's remarkable
That is
response.
absolutely remarkable. You talked a little bit about the side effects of immunotherapy. Do you have any tips? And this could be for patients or caregivers, because some patients don't have a caregiver. But do you have any tips for someone who's going through immunotherapy and maybe having some side effects?
I think it's really vital to be aware of what the potential side effects are, because some of them may seem minor, but they may need attention right away and may be easily treated if they're caught at an early stage. I was given a lot of information. I was on nivolumab, which is a Bristol Myers product, and I was given a wealth of information from Bristol Myers. And I also had a care manager from Bristol Myers that would call me every time I had an infusion a couple days later. And we always went over whatever was going on. And if there was any questions, they could follow up with my oncologist. So I had a long checklist of things to be mindful for. And I've since learned from other newer patients that they're not always aware of the side effects. So I've always tried to stress to people, please try to research what the side effects are. And if you have any, to notify your doctor right away, because the earlier you can get them under control, the better response you'll have.
That's great advice. And you mentioned the drug maker of your immunotherapy. So over the last few years, there have been so many new advancements. And with those advancements, they have created patient care coordinators at pharmaceutical companies or case managers or oncology nurses. There's still that hesitation with connecting with pharma and big pharma. What was your experience like talking with them while you were on immunotherapy? And do you recommend that to those who may be hesitant to work with pharmaceutical companies?
I, being the first patient at my hospital to ever go on immunotherapy, the people from the pharmaceutical company actually came there and did an in-service. And not only with me, but with the oncology nurses who were going to be doing the infusions, because again, I was the first person to have immunotherapy, so it was new for them as well. So they gave me oodles of information, and they told me right away about their patient nurse navigator people. And I started with that program right away and found it very useful. I always recommend it to other people. It's someone that understands the drug, sometimes even better than some of the doctors who may be using different drugs for different people. And they will also work directly with your oncology team if there are any concerns, and they have more access to data than maybe your oncology department has. Not to mention back then it was also new that we really had to, we were like another form of almost a clinical trial, the first patients outside of trial. So they were very interested in following the new patients.
You make some really, really important points. And I think my my nugget from that is that the pharmaceutical companies and the resources that they offer to patients can be a tool in our toolbox. And I think folks need maybe open-minded about the fact that, you know, pharmaceutical companies do have patient assistance programs that really work. So
I think they're wonderful. I mean, I always recommend them to people. And on the other side of things, for people who have very expensive medications, they can also offer financial assistance. So working with the drug manufacturer is a benefit to you more than it could ever be a negative. It can only help you understand the drug, understand, you know, the options that you have for payment options, and just the support, and then working back with your own team.
yeah, that's a very important point. Very important. So, two last questions. One, I want to ask you about the Lung Cancer Support Network group on Facebook. And then I want to ask you how you're doing today and, you know, what brings you joy and hope these days as a survivor.
I just feel incredibly lucky to be an 8-year survivor at this point. It was almost unheard of for that to happen at the time of my diagnosis. I've gone on to see the birth of my 3 granddaughters, who are the loves of my life, and none of which existed when I was diagnosed. My children weren't married, they were pretty young still, so I've watched my children grow up and become amazing adults. You know, I have a good life now. I travel, and I love the summer and love to go to the beach and love to spend time with my family. So I feel incredibly blessed that I've had such a good response. I love trying to support other patients, so I'm very happy to be a part of the network. And I love the Zoom calls that we do bi-weekly with the patients, and just want to help other people and let them understand that they're not alone in this journey.
I think that's fantastic. And I think you're fantastic. And thank you so much for everything that you do to support patients with lung cancer, the lung cancer community, and for sharing your story with us today. Thank you, Lisa.